let him in.
I don't see him.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, August 3rd, 2023 regular meeting of the school committee. I am going to call the meeting to order and ask those who are here in the audience to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so we do have one member remote tonight. We
There
have
he is.
Adam here on the computer, so that means that any votes that we take here will be done by roll call vote. So with that, I would...
Can we just have him try to speak so we
oh,
make
yes.
sure we hear
Can we
him?
do a sound check with you, Adam? We can't hear him, but he looks like he can hear us. Oh, yes, and just for everybody to be aware that this meeting is being recorded. It's not, is he muted?
I don't know, let's see if these are on. Try again.
Okay, and we've got Chris here as well. So maybe we should check to see if Chris can hear us, if he can speak and do a sound check, because then we'll know which end the sound is from.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe we're probably muted.
Chris.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, I can hear you, Adam.
Okay, so I just heard Chris. Adam, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. We can hear you as well.
Without these, is that okay?
Do you need to maybe?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, if I go without these speakers, because I'm using the internals.
Yeah, I think so, just as long as it's pointed towards the microphone so that we can hear them as well.
Okay.
So if it's okay, because I don't see anybody here for public comment, I would like to take out of order the Elmwood project update. Is that okay with you, John and Chris?
Sure.
All right, so do you want to come on up? And then
Out of here earlier? Sure.
I wasn't prepared on my slides up.
thank you for coming, to both of you for being here tonight on an extra meeting night.
For having us.
So, and for those at home who don't know, although I feel like everybody has seen you a lot recently, John Graziano is the chair of the Elementary School Building Committee too, the Elmwood School Project.
Yes, thank you. And joining me remotely is Chris Everly, who is our project manager from Vertex Engineering, just in case there are any more technical questions that I can't answer. So, so thank you for having me here, for the opportunity. I really like to have as many opportunities to talk about this project in public as I possibly can, because there is an incredible volume of information, and even if you do watch all of our meetings, it's probably difficult to catch all of it, and voters are going to be asked to make a pretty important choice in early November, so we want to make sure we get as much information out as possible. So tonight I was going to focus on a couple of things. First, I want to go over some key upcoming dates, because they're really relevant to the school committee and the community as a whole in terms of where we are on the project. Then I wanted to use the platform to talk about a couple of pieces of feedback I've been hearing from the public around some of the choices we've already made about the school, including the location itself, as well as some of the design decisions that we've made to this point. So in terms of key and upcoming dates, this all works backwards from, as everyone I think knows, we're partnered with the Massachusetts School Building Authority in this process. And while they're an extremely helpful partner, it's a rigorous process, and we have certain requirements of timing that we have to hit. So we are targeting an early November town meeting where the town would be asked to vote on the project, which seems really far away, unless you're on the ESBC, and then it does not seem far away at all. What we need to do between now and then is first and foremost finalize what the project budget is going to look like. How much is this school going to cost? And so we've been batting around a lot of options to help drive our designers in putting the project scope together. Next week, our designer and our project manager will receive 2 cost estimates. from independent estimators, and they'll go about reconciling those estimates and provide them to the committee on or about August 9th or 10th. That is when we'll get our hands on them for the first time. We've scheduled 2 discussions around these. The first one is going to be on Friday, August 11th for the committee, just really to hear from Vertex and Perkins Eastman to get familiar with what is this thing we're even looking at, because most of us probably have not seen a document like this. What should we be looking for? What are our initial thoughts and concerns? Leading up to August 15th, when we'll do a deep dive review of the cost estimates, and that's where we'll look for things that maybe we want to cut out to keep the price down, things that could go in as alternates if we end up having the project come in a little more inexpensively, and really start to shape what that project budget will look like. Then the following week on the 22nd, we'll review the total project budget. We'll at that point know, based on the budget, what is the exact MSBA reimbursement that we can expect, which I know is a big part of this, and it's been a bit of a floating number. And then a couple days later, that date has changed in the last hour. So on the 22nd, there's a posted school committee meeting as well, and I think we're going to manage kind of the timing so that the school committee will come in towards the end of our meeting, or maybe attend the whole thing to watch it. But at the end of our meeting, the school committee will also give an endorsement vote of the project budget. We'll do the same thing with the select board on the 29th, and then we will vote to approve the schematic design submission, so the final submission to the MSBA. And then that'll go in on August 31st. So a lot of technical dates, but really for the community, what you want to know is we have been talking in a lot of broad estimates and saying things like, we think the way we've chosen to build the building is going to save us some amount of money. We think that this is the reason why we want to make these exterior finish choices, because of the price. This is where we will get the hard numbers, and we'll be able to really answer all of those questions that we haven't been able to definitively answer about what this project is going to cost and why. Questions on that before I go on, or should I just go through the whole thing and then do questions? Okay. One thing that has come up a lot is I've been fielding a lot of questions about so obviously the big thing is this school is priced to be very expensive. Whatever the estimates come in at, it's going to be a very big number. And so, not surprisingly, a lot of citizens have questions about that, and they have questions about alternatives. And so I just wanted to kind of reiterate, for some of you, this will be kind of old hat, but in the process over the last year, the Elementary School Building Committee reviewed 44 sites across Hopkinton that were primarily based on that they were big enough to house a school of the size that we needed. We filtered them down, eventually landing at the Hayden Row site as the preferred option, as the best option to house the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade school and give us the ability to do what we want to do to make this a really effective school for the students, staff, and teachers. I just wanted to hit on a couple of these options that people have been asking about. One of them are the buildings on South Street. So there are a lot of commercial buildings that we know are unoccupied. They're not currently owned by the town, which is one of the obstacles to pursuing those. But we did look at that possibility, and the biggest things that we found are, first of all, they're built as office buildings, and office buildings are built differently than schools. They're built to kind of keep everybody in the middle. The reason why our schematic design has the wings that it does is so that every classroom can have windows. If we were to do that in an office building, we'd have classrooms in the middle that would not have ready access to windows. Also, the HVAC requirements are very different for schools and would require probably an entire replacement of the system. And office buildings don't have gyms or cafeterias, so those would need to be built as well. We had our designers run a quick estimate, and quickly that number got close to $140 million if we were to use one of those, including a rough estimate for what it would cost to acquire. And that's with a lot of unknowns. So I think as we dug deeper, that number would continue to come up. So you can see that that's sort of, while it might seem that way, it's not a more efficient option. The other one was the old Liberty Mutual site. And this really came down to two things. The site is decent size, but is a lot of wetlands. We wouldn't really have the room to build the building on there. And the other thing is, for people familiar with the area where the old Liberty Mutual campus is in Hopkinton, it's kind of back behind Franklin Road. And if you've ever driven there, very narrow, very winding roads, and the traffic load for both cars and buses just really wouldn't be feasible back there. Elmwood renovation doesn't provide the cost savings people would expect. The necessary expansion would include like a new gym and cafeteria, as well as we'd have to relocate the students while we were building that building, which would cost in excess of probably $20 million, assuming we could even find a place to put the modular classroom somewhere in town. And the site did not allow us to add the 4th grade. So if we use the Elmwood site as an addition renovation, it would have had to have included only the 2nd and 3rd grade. And the last one, I've gotten a few questions about Center School. So as we know, Center School has been vacant since it closed and was replaced by Marathon. So even disregarding what the condition would be after 5 years of being unoccupied, the site doesn't allow the expansion that we would have. So you could fit the footprint of the school, but you wouldn't have room for things like play space or all of those all those other pieces, and it would be difficult to fit in. We actually looked at Center School for the Marathon project about where we could expand, and it does appear that there's a lot of room back there, but there's also a lot of ledge back there, which becomes really, really expensive to build on. So one thing I will say is I've had a lot of conversations in the last 2 weeks with individual residents who have come to me and said, did you consider this? Have you thought about this? I welcome those to keep coming. I'm happy to talk to as many residents as have questions about this project. Our email address is esbc2@hopkintonma.gov. Please reach out. I would much rather have questions in advance that we can research and can address rather than sort of saving them until town meeting, because I think that really helps us. So appreciate the engagement and hope it keeps up. And speaking of engagement, before I get to the pretty pictures, our next community forum is going to be on August 10th. It's a virtual forum, so you can find the Zoom link. I know it was sent out by the school district today. It should be on the town website tomorrow, and you can find the Zoom link to participate in our next public forum. So I also did want to share, because if I'm going to do one of these updates, it's nice to have a vision of what we're talking about. So these are the most current updates to the schematic design. This is our site plan. We've done a lot of refinement to this site plan, thinking about traffic, thinking about how we can reduce asphalt, thinking about how we can be as efficient but effective as possible with the recess and PE space. The recess area, I've gotten a lot of feedback from residents that seem to think that the recess area looks quite large. This is where I like to remind people that this school is being built to house 1,200 students. And so if you think about just rotating through the recess schedules that will happen, we need a lot of space. And I think we would all agree that giving children sufficient space to get outside during the day is critical. The PE fields, again, 4 PE fields, the whole thing, if you add all 4 of those up, equates to about 1 full-size soccer field. And again, a lot of PE field space, it's a lot of kids. So we needed to build effectively for this. The roadway design will pull almost all of our car and bus traffic off of Hayden Row, which was a critical component to design to try to reduce the traffic. And then from a schematic floor plan perspective, this one's a little tougher to see, but as you can see, it is a 3-story school. Yeah, that one. 3-story school with 3 wings that create a bit of a neighborhood feel. So I've talked about it, the 1,200 kids. It's a very big school, but I think what the design will do is really give them that cozy neighborhood feel, that they won't feel like they're going to this large school. Their floor, their wing will be able to be kind of an inclusive space for them in there as well. We're continuing to refine this. We've made some decisions around what the materials are that are going in this school. An example of this is, we've tried to keep cost in mind as much as possible. So people who have been in marathon school might be familiar with some of the kind of flair that is in there with the design of the floors and things like that. We haven't gone that way with this one. And one of the reasons is we're really trying to make sure that we are great custodians of the cost, because we know how expensive this school is going to be. So we tried to keep as many bells and whistles out of it while still making it what I think is going to be a really incredible school for the students, staff, and faculty. So that's my update. I'll take your questions if you have any.
Thank you. Questions? I want to also make sure, Adam, if you have any questions, like this down there.
No, I think it will be more telling is when we have the update with a better cost estimate. I think that's really where the big concern for the majority of folks that have approached me is around the cost and making sure that we've looked at the alternatives. And it sounds like that's really what this committee is trying to stress as the program's progressing.
So, thank you, and I should note, I know it wasn't a question, but I'll answer it like it was. The two things about this is with the high cost of this school is, I think people need to remember, with the way we educate our students in Hopkinton, having all of the students in one grade level in one building means that we're building a bigger school. Because as the grade expands, it's not like we can split it up and build keep Elmwood going and build another second and third grade school. That's not how we educate our children. And so I've heard a lot of people, when they talk about price, also talk about, like, why do we need something that's so big? There really aren't alternatives that cost less that could house this many students. And so I've also heard people say, is this going to be the biggest elementary school in Massachusetts? And the answer is, I think it might be. If it's not, it's real close. And it comes back to that idea of the model which we educate our children.
And if I could just add to that, one of the things that folks should keep in mind when they hear something like that is that Hopkinton's been in this position for a number of years. And they've maintained a really high-performing school district, despite the fact that you have one of the largest individual grade levels in a single building classes of any school in the state. And so this isn't a new thing that we're introducing to the town of Hopkinton. We're taking your existing kids that you're teaching in significantly less space and giving them the appropriate amount of space to teach them into the future.
Also, just want to piggyback on kind of the way that we educate our kids. This is something that it kind of goes back a number of years when the town really did resoundingly weigh in and say that we did not want neighborhood districted schools. And that it has been feedback that we've sort of stayed away from looking at that piece intentionally, because that's the feedback that we have received both by votes of previous schools and just from feedback around town. So. Other questions, comments?
When you get, I know you've received a lot of questions, you've done so much work, and I very much appreciate it. When you provide all the information, like the answers to the common questions like you've given to us, do you feel like that is something that people are like, okay, I get this? Do you feel like this is something that once it's explained, it's kind of take it in and absorbed?
I do. I've had a lot of those conversations with people who start out very, very kind of negatively oriented towards the school, and have a bit of a, well, why don't we just do this instead?
Yeah.
And not only talking through their option, their why don't we do this instead, but also just walking through what the process has been. What are the factors that are driving this? There's a slide that I didn't put in here that we also keep showing that I think is powerful for a lot of people, which shows the cost per square foot of school construction, and just shows how it has gone up over the last 5 years, and the inflation rate has been incredible. But if you look at school projects that are in the phase that this project is, that are going through the MSBA program right now, our cost per square foot is pretty much right in the middle. So we're not building something that's palatial. We're not building something that's extra. We're building something that's really in line with where school costs are right now. And I think that's another thing that people, when they get that context, that becomes very powerful for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing you may also want to mention, I've heard a lot of people say, well, what happens if we even have greater enrollment than we're anticipating? Is there a contingency plan?
Yeah, so there are some contingency plans. These schools are designed to be able to expand. And so you definitely can't see it on the slide because it's way too small and light, but there are dotted out lines at the end of each wing where you could add classrooms, much in the way we have done for the Marathon School. So that's something that we have tried to keep in mind, because what it allows you to do, because I think the other, I get that question, and then I get the other way question, which is, are we building this too big? And we didn't want to put those extra classrooms in because we don't know if we're going to keep growing at the rate. But I will say that in numbers that I know we've all talked about and have been talked about a lot at these meetings, I mean, next year, second, third, and fourth grade is 1,000 kids. And we're building the school for 1,195, and it's slated to open in 2027. So, for people who think that the growth rate is going to slow, you might be right. But even if it does, we're still going to be right there in 2027.
Yes, in our next televised meeting, we should have very good enrollment numbers for this coming year to share with the public as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming, but also the historical view. I think people have started to tune into this more now as we're getting closer to bringing it to the town for a vote. But to look at 44 sites that were looked at and to know that the due diligence was done to see, is there a better alternative? Also, so appreciate your encouraging of people to come to have conversations and to get those questions out there so that people can know what it is, and kind of the thought process that has gone into trying to find the least costly building that would be able to support our enrollment and our educational plan. So,
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And I'll let you get on.
and thank you, Chris, for coming, tuning in with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So, all right, see you on Tuesday at the forum.
Yes. No.
Thursday.
Oh, yes, sorry. Tuesday is the ESBC day in my head, that's why. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Chris.
So do we want to circle, take?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Would you like to come up and take Nature's Classroom out of order? That's okay.
Thank you so much.
Happy summer, it's really nice to see you.
Yes, it's a nice summer so far. It's nice to see all of you. Thank you for tonight. I'm here to seek final approval for the grade 6 trip to Nature's Classroom, which is scheduled to be November 13th through 17th. We're going to maintain the 2 separate trips like we did last year. One group goes Monday through Wednesday, and the second trip goes Wednesday to Friday. Because our class sizes are so large, it's hard to find a facility that can feed 300 kids. They can sleep them, but they can't feed them. On our initial request, we anticipated the cost to be about $350, but we have to leave that cost hanging because we never know transportation costs. And we have finally gotten 2 coach bus companies to commit. We have to split. They weren't all available, and the costs for them has doubled from last year. I think we're close to $28,000 to transport 300 people there and back. So that added a significant increase in cost, which we're requesting for families to pay $410. Which we know is a significant increase. And still, we think there's value behind this, but we want to acknowledge that for families, especially anyone who might have more than one child in grade 6, can be, the difficulty. So there's always a request for financial assistance, as we have in the past, and payment plans. But it's something that we know we need to continue to consider The trip is 2.5 hours to 3 hours from Hopkinton. It's at Lake Ossipee in New Hampshire. And so school buses really aren't a preferred way of transportation, besides the fact that we couldn't, because we can't use the buses to transport our kids and the students in school every day. So we're kind of stuck with the option for the coach buses.
Thank you. Questions? I'm going to start, Adam, down with you. Do you have any questions?
No, I think the program is wonderful. My son participated in it a few years ago, and nothing but great things to say.
It just looks so amazing. I was looking at the offerings. I was like, I want to go. I want to go to
We'll
the
take
next.
chaperones. We always need them. I know. It's sleeping in a cabin for a week. A little bit much for my weary bones.
Now, the adults sleep in the cabin with the students, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're all there as overnight chaperones. Yeah, it cramps the style of just a little bit.
Yeah.
The cost for this trip, I would assume, and maybe somebody you may know, that falls under our like financial aid policy. Do we have like things in place to help families that can't afford the $410?
So I know that in the past we have requested through the Angel Fund and a few other sources to help families who can't pay. We've also done payment plans,
Yeah.
which a lot of families has helped them.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure if there's other things that maybe I'm not remembering for financial
So if
assistance.
students do qualify, for financial assistance,
Right.
that obviously,
Right.
either partially covered or fully covered.
Right.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
If I recall, the Angel Fund and some of the other sources that I know you've approached in the past is above and beyond what our financial aid policy is.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of Nature's Classroom. 2 Nature's Classroom graduates in my household, and I think it's a great program. It's a great way to start the middle school experience. Glad that we could reboot get it back sort of on the right rhythm after the pandemic. And we are facing cost increases everywhere, so I understand that, especially in transportation. And I'm thankful that we raised the threshold for financial aid last year for qualification, so hopefully people can or lower the threshold rather. Hopefully people can avail themselves of that if they need it or find those other means. But thank you for bringing it forward and continuing it.
Echo what all of my colleagues have said. I also think that's a beautiful facility up on Lake Ossipee. So
It was a nice change from where we'd been going, which was a great program, but we needed something that better suited our students' needs. And despite the fact that it was really, really cold in November,
snow one of the sessions, right?
to wake up and to have my coffee while looking at Lake Ossipee, I mean, you can't really beat that. So if I have to go on vacation with a lot of 12-year-olds, it's a nice place to go, or 11 at the time. So.
All right. Then if there are no more questions, I would seek a motion related to this.
I'll move to approve the grade 6 Nature's Classroom for November 2023.
So a motion by Holly. Is there a second on that? Susan
Second
has a
that.
second. And we'll do a roll call starting with you, Adam.
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Holly?
Yeah.
Amanda?
Aye.
And I am also an aye, so unanimously passes. Thank you so much for coming, giving up an evening to come spend with
Thank
us.
you very much.
So
And the offer stands if you'd like to help chaperone, just be in touch.
I was told last year by my own child I was not allowed to chaperone then.
That was your kid.
Well, you don't. You'd be such an embarrassment.
So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cranford style.
All right, so we're going to circle back to go into order. The next back in the beginning would be public comment, but there is literally nobody here from the public in the audience. So I think we can safely move into recognitions if anybody has a recognition they would like to share. Okay. In that case, we can move into the superintendent's report.
Okay, so this is very brief tonight, and it may be a quasi-recognition. So this is the superintendent's report for August 3rd. And I just wanted to share some news from Beacon Hill. So we had our joint meeting with the select board on Tuesday, and some very good outcomes from the from the Senate and the House of Representatives. So we have our Chapter 70 money is fully funded, and it's $9.8 million for Hopkinton, which is a 12.1 increase over last year. What kind of dictates that 12.1 increase, we think, is an increase in our special education numbers, an increase in enrollment generally, and just more socioeconomic need in our community. There were 2 earmarks set aside for us, $60,000 for curricular interrogation, and by that we mean that we are going to be posting for someone to come in and take a look at biases in our curricula. And that will give us an opportunity to take a look at what we're teaching and how we're teaching it and make any modifications necessary. And then, of course, $100,000 for social emotional learning, which is something that Senate President Karen Spilka is always about. And then the very, very good news is that there's universal free lunch. So thanks so much to our Senate President Karen Spilka and State Representative James Arena DeRosa. Whenever you reach out to them, they respond to you immediately. If you have something you want to talk about, they sit and listen. Karen will always invite the superintendents in her region to a lunch a couple of times a year, so we have her ear. I don't think we could ask for better people representing us. Then the following day, we had the YMCA Metro West Advocacy Day, and so you can see some Gaga Ball on bottom left, and I will tell you those kids love it. They play it all day. They tell them you can play something else. They say, no, we'll just keep playing this. And then over on the right-hand side, very interesting, you can see our friends James Arena DeRosa and Senator Spilka out there shooting bows and arrows. And that's really all I have for you. It's just a little legislative update.
All good news?
Yeah.
Questions or comments for Dr. Kavanaugh?
We are lucky. We have great reps.
We sure are. Yeah.
I'm really blown away by the 12%. I think we feel the growth and the needs to serve the students, and every year with the budget we feel like we're just barely getting by with what we've got, and to see the state formula reflecting that we need a 12.1% increase is indicative of the fact that we do actually need the increases. We know that we are building budgets bottom up, but it's just interesting to see that I don't know, affirmation, I guess, of the struggle we feel coming from the State House.
Great. The other piece that I was very excited about as well is that Karen Spilka had mentioned the $600,000 that's going to be split between the 6 communities in her district for mental health programming. So a chunk of that will go to Hopkinton, which is,
Awesome.
I think much needed and appreciated. Right. Anyone else? Great, thank you. That brings us into the school committee chair report. I just want to start by saying payroll warrant S24002 has been approved. Warrants 24-001S and 24-002S have been approved. Warrants included in the folder. I also just wanted to update people that just prior to this meeting, I had a meeting with the select board chair, the appropriations chair, the ESBC2 chair, and to really try to seek the questions that the boards and committees might have, so that we can have a best understanding we possibly can of where concerns are from residents, but also to try to invite more from the boards that are participating in this process. So it was a good start of a conversation. Obviously, when you're looking at early November for a special town meeting, it I think is going to come up faster than it feels like. So that was that.
Nancy, can you share any of the concerns that were raised, or will those go to John Graziano to respond? How is it going to work?
So, just off the cuff of a meeting that happened literally right before, it would be hard for me to capture the meeting like right here on the spot. But so that, so he did hear those.
He was there.
I think one of the biggest one obviously is cost, the cost of the project. That's something I think many, if not all of us, have shared concerns over the cost and what that impact is, and also looking at the, waiting for harder numbers to come very shortly and how we're going to be looking at those. We also were looking at what the calendar is going to be. He did mention the 22nd, which is the night of the elementary school building committee, in the potential, and I did want to bring this back to see if this works for people here as well. We have to take a vote between August 22nd and August 29th. We have a meeting on the 24th that's in the daytime, but that's really more of a workshop, and it seemed like it would be better suited for us to take our actual vote on the schematic design on a different opportunity.
Like
when
in a
we're-
public space.
in a public
Yeah,
space,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So one option that we had talked about was having it piggyback on the elementary school building committee meeting, which would give everyone here the opportunity to watch what's going on there. And then we would kind of bring ourselves together after that, after the elementary school building committee has taken a vote, and then we can take a vote to endorse it.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
So that's all I got.
thank you.
Are there liaison reports? Okay, I know things are, it feels like longer ago than last week that we met, but in fact it was not. All right, so we did already the final intended travel as well as the ESBC 2 project update, and that brings us into the budget and the budget process, and this is a trifecta here.
It sure is. So we know that you wanted to learn or educate the community maybe a little bit more about the budget and the budget process. And so the three of us have put our heads together to make this presentation tonight. And we hope that it's informative, and if there are questions that the community has about the budget or the budget process, they can always reach out to us and we are happy to answer them. So one of the things that we wanted to start with tonight was a reminder of our strategic priorities and our district improvement plan. If you visit our website, and we spent a lot of time, I think, last summer with the administrative team kind of crafting this and revising it because it's what we often do. So our vision statement says that the Hopkinton Public School District aspires to be a community of educational innovation where children are challenged and inspired to reach their fullest potential, afforded the agency to define who they will become, and celebrated for their human kindness. And our mission, says the Hopkinton Public Schools, ensures equitable access for all students to academically challenging curricula in a community that supports social-emotional learning, ultimately guiding young adults to create their own pathways, engage in citizenship, and foster respect for self and others. And when we do our district improvement plan, we will typically take that and put it under, three great big topics. So we call them our buckets to fill. And the first is planning for enrollment growth, and so I think you'll see quite a bit of that when we talk about, like, for example, Mr. Graziano being here to talk about the Elmwood project, and also we have underway now a Hopkins Addition project. It's very important that we meet every student's needs, and last year our mantra was all means all, and this year we're looking at all really can mean all. I'm just doubling down on it. And then finally building a community of respect and collaboration.
So, and just a reference again is looking at the school committee policy, and this is an excerpt. The annual budget is the financial expression of the educational programs and the priorities of the district. The budget then is more than just a financial instrument and requires cooperation on the parts of the school committee, the administrative staff, and the community to ensure sound fiscal practices for achieving the educational goals and objectives of the school district.
So as we're doing our school budget and we think about how all of the things that we do are funded, it really comes down to three facets. We have our operating budget, we have the capital budget, and we look for grant funding to support some of the work that we do. So what do each one of those things entail? The operating budget is school funding that is made up of two components, and we break that down into salary and expenses. The capital budget is for asset requests of $25,000 or more, and grant funding is typically the entitlement and competitive money that augments the operating budget. So we'll start with the operating budget. In terms of the operating budget, there's a very traditional timeline. It stretches from, at least on our end, from September to January when we hand the budget over to the town. Ultimately, it culminates in annual town meeting in May, and very often we are working from January to May on the budget continuously. So while it looks like our work is done in January, it's not necessarily so. So our launch takes place in September, and that's when our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, in sync with our town partners, will set the budget calendar for the school district. In the preparation phase, our building principals and some of our directors will begin to evaluate their needs for the next fiscal year, and in the meantime, a capital budget is also being established. Then presentations are made. Each of the building principals and some of the directors will make a presentation to the school committee, and Mrs. Rothermick will present the capital budget to you. And then finally, in January, there is a vote. So the school committee holds a budget hearing, and then that budget is voted on and submitted to the town.
So starting at the very beginning, setting up the budget calendar. So in September, the town manager works with the select board, the school committee, and appropriations committee to establish a budget message. The budget message is based on the town's financial projections. These boards also set forth a date by which the approved school budget must be handed over to the select board, and the school committee votes on the budget timeline that the schools will follow. So as you can see in the small snippet, it starts in September, meet with the town manager and the CEO, CFO. September, joint meetings. Then in September, budget instructions will go out to the building administrators and departments. They'll start having those conversations within their school, developing the capital plan. Then we're looking at the individual budgets. And then you can see starting in early October, so it's very quick. So when teachers are coming back to school September 1, that month of September, they're developing the budget, because in October, we're already hearing their budgets. So it's a very quick turnaround for the very beginning of the school year, but then as you can see, it's a long process. So that is how it works in terms of setting up the calendar, getting all the way through, as Dr. Kavanaugh said, to January for a vote, and then to May for town meeting.
So we do also have budget advisory group meetings, and so throughout the budget meeting season, starting in September and running all the way through annual town meeting, we do sort of weekly meetings, and the people who are participating in that are our town manager, the town CFO, one member of the select board, a member of the school committee, a member of appropriations, the school superintendent, and the assistant superintendent of finance and operations. So, you know, we're pretty good about keeping those meetings in place. And what's nice is that the lines of communication stay open.
So the roles, the principals and the directors, as we talked about, starting right in September, the building principals and the directors throughout the district begin to build their budgets. They begin with a zero-based budget, which means the budget is built from the ground up with students at the center of the work. So some of the factors that are influencing the budget decisions, the school improvement plans and the district strategic plan, which you saw on the very first slides, student enrollment numbers and the student-generated scheduling, our class size guidelines and caseload sizes, data-driven decisions such as test scores, progress monitoring data, individual student needs, including IEPs, curriculum, instruction, and assessment needs, social, behavioral, emotional needs, changes in demographics, new compliance requirements, and physical plant needs. So you can imagine in the first month, we're looking forward to what will happen a year from now based on all that data to develop the budget. And as we always talk about, this budget really is salary driven. So you can see our typical budget is always 80% salary and 20% just of expenses. So it's really driven by people and positions.
So in terms of presentations, in addition to those administrators that we described meeting with Susan and me to talk about, you know, sort of their asks in the coming year, they also come and make a presentation to all of you and to the community. So in November, for example, last year we had special education, technology, and facilities, and we always sort of follow this same pattern. We had next athletics, high school, middle school, and curriculum and instruction. So we see those 4 budgets. Then in December, the central office budget, Hopkins, Elmwood, and Marathon. And once we've seen all of those, we put everything together and we start to make those kind of great big, this is the consolidated budget. And we do that in December to the joint board, so there'll be school committee and select board and appropriations. Then in December and January, we will make these presentations at regular school committee meetings. In January, we hold a public hearing, and then in January, there's a school committee vote. So the same presentation is made multiple times because it's really important that we have that kind of transparency with the community.
And just as a reminder, both to the committee and to the community, these presentations are done multiple times. So these meetings probably took place at least 9 or 10 times over the course. So there's a lot of opportunities for the public to get involved, for the public to ask questions, and to just really get the information that they need to understand the budget. So again, the principals and the directors from the district will meet individually first with Dr. Kavanaugh and myself. And we know and we stress that obviously money is finite. Now in these small meetings, the building principal and directors will present the zero-based budget that they've developed. Using input from these budget meetings, choices are discussed to determine the appropriate allocation of resources across the district to recommend a budget to the school committee that meets the needs of the educational priorities. Some of these asks that come forward are placed on the back burner. Other asks that demonstrate the needs are put forth to the school committee. So the next slide will show you some of the asks that were not put forward as the recommended budget by the superintendent. And just a reminder, the Hopkinton Public Schools does a lot with very little, given the school's per pupil expenditure is about $15,000 annually, and that is among the lowest in the Commonwealth. So this next slide represents some of the asks that were put forward that did not make it through the budget process. Again, getting back to the fact that we know that the money is finite, these are things that did not move forward when you consolidate the budget and try to make the money work.
Yeah, and I think interesting also on this slide is the last line. So if we take a look at the 9.5 requested FTEs that would have amounted to just over $500,000 or $500,000, that's close to a 1% increase over the previous year. And so, you know, as we've said, money is finite, but we do get a message from the town about what they feel that they can afford. And so, you know, when you're asked to trim 1%, that can be what it looks like.
This doesn't even include the technology. I don't remember exactly what they were called. That we pulled a couple of FTEs off the budget at the end of the season.
That's correct.
And this doesn't include those positions either.
Right. What you see there is just going through that budget process.
This
so
is
September, October.
Yeah, pre-vote. These were removed, and then you removed additional FTEs.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that touches on the operating budget. The piece that also helps to fund the operating budget are the revolving accounts. So a revolving fund separately accounts for specific revenues and earmarks them for expenditures by a board or officer without appropriation for a particular purpose to support the activity, program, or service that generated that revenue. So typically the revolving funds are authorized by state law for programs or services with expenses that fluctuate with demand and can be matched with fees, charges, or other revenues collected during the year. So if you go to the next slide, when you think about the revolving accounts that help to reduce the ask for the operating budget for the community. The FY23 budget, the actual offsets were 2.3 million, but the actual receipts that came in was 2 million from those same accounts. So you can see that our use is exceeding our revenue by 350,000 in FY23. So when we look at our budgets, the offsets that we're utilizing for FY24, it's up to 2.6 million compared to what we either brought in revenue of 2 million or what our actual offsets were in FY23 of 2.3 million. So these forecasted uses right now are expected to last the least one through FY '27, and then further out would be FY '30. Now, the revenue is evaluated annually, so how long those forecasts can hold will change annually based on that actual revenue that comes in.
And then we thought this might be a slide of interest to folks. We looked at FY '20, '21, '22, and '23, and you can see where the enrollment is. It starts at 3,897 students. It goes to 4,206. And you can also see the increases in the operating budget spanning from $48,044,950 to $55,522,404. So just, I think, something of interest, and I think you can see with the incredible increase in numbers of kids that the operating budget increases are not really a surprise. And all of those are June numbers. All right, so we'll go to the capital budget.
All right, so moving on to capital, some of the things that we talked about actually just in the last meeting, which was last week. So our capital planning, the 5-year lookout, again, this is from the Government Finance Officers Association. State and local governments should prepare and adopt comprehensive, fiscally sustainable, and multi-year capital plans to ensure effective management of capital assets. A prudent multi-year capital plan identifies and prioritizes expected needs based on a strategic plan, establishes project scope and cost, details estimated amounts of funding from various sources, and projects future operating and maintenance costs. Capital facilities and infrastructure are important legacies that serve current and future generations. It's extremely difficult for governments to address the current and long-term needs of their citizens without a sound multi-year capital plan that clearly identifies capital needs, funding options, and operating budget impacts. Moving to the next slide, and this is the Town of Hopkinton Financial Management Policy, and it's an excerpt for their capital program policies. A, the town has made a practice of funding the operating budget at the expense of capital items, resulting in a backlog of pending capital requirements and deferred maintenance, which could ultimately lead to critical failures and increased costs. The town should strive to ensure that capital items are not funded through operating budgets and should seek to ensure that capital items are properly funded even in times of financial constraint in order to prevent larger costs or losses later. And B, the Capital Improvement Committee and the town manager will continue to maintain a rolling 5-year list of anticipated capital needs, and this list should be reviewed and updated annually. So part of what we talked about last week is the fact that a 5-year plan is the management tool that we are using and is a good tool, but again, it should be reviewed annually because there's always levers and things do change to have that forecast be correct.
Yeah, I think some of the important language are words like anticipated and expected and reviewed annually. It is very important. And we do have a good 5-year plan, but we know that we have to keep coming back to it. So some of the things that govern our capital budgeting, and this comes again from one of the town documents. Capital projects are to build, replace, or improve facilities, grounds, mechanical, and technological infrastructure. It exceeds $25,000. The town actually has a process for requesting a capital item or capital improvements, and it applies to all the capital requests in the community. The school committee approves our capital plan typically in October. The Capital Improvement Committee, the CIC, reviews each capital request and presents its recommendations to the town manager before December 31st. The process requires that all capital requests go through the town manager, and the town strives to finance major capital items such as major construction projects or significant renovations with debt exclusions. So what drives the capital planning for the schools? In terms of facilities, we have 5 buildings over 120 acres. It doesn't sound like a lot when you say 5 buildings, but those buildings are very large buildings, and we really don't have a lot of custodians and maintenance guys who take care of that, and they do a really great job. So if we take a look at some of the capital asks, for example, things like the HVAC replacements or the work truck, those have been, kind of typical facilities, things that we've asked for. In terms of enrollment, we're over 4,200 students, ages 3 to 22. So in order to accommodate our rapid enrollment growth, we've done some stick-built additions, and we've done a lot of modular additions, again, capital items. And then finally, enhancements. So our programs continue to evolve. Sometimes they evolve because technology evolves. Sometimes they evolve because we just have more kids. But things like the marathon playground or the technology upgrades that you see in our annual capital asks.
So again, looking at putting together a 5-year plan, one of the things that folds together is both enrollment and our capacity within our buildings. So we did a district-wide planning study for across all our buildings, and this was also helped to inform the Elmwood project, whether it would be a 2-3 or a 2-3-4 project. So this is what's called a stoplight analysis. Green meaning you're in a good spot, yellow meaning caution, and red meaning that you're beyond your target. So this is taking the enrollment and our enrollment projections along with what is available square footage wise within each building. As long as we're in the green, the students and the projected students are able to fit within that building. When you get into the yellow, things are starting to get tighter with their enrollment, and red is you've really run out of space. Yellow, you've started to use things that are not traditional classrooms, and red really is you're out of that space and class size will rise. So this is where the decision for a 2-3-4 project came to be as opposed to a 2-3. You can see for the Elmwood School, that puts that building into the green starting in 27 when the building would be projected to open. But what that still does is you can see that Hopkins continues to stay in the red even with shifting 6th grade down, 4th grade out. So it does not fit a 2-grade school, no matter what grades are in there. So that also drove the Hopkins addition. But what that does allow, both the Elmwood project and the Hopkins addition, is for the middle school to then go into the green. And then you can see that the high school continues to stay in the yellow and the red. However, that is one of the levers that we talked about last week, meaning that when the middle school classroom, when the 6th grade moves, it opens up enough classrooms for the high school to shift in. And then depending on our ability to utilize that space, the green, the yellow, and the red could shift out further. And so that's where the 5-year look really becomes very important. But this is an example of what is done to really put together a comprehensive long-term plan just for facilities using our enrollment growth.
All right, and now I'll hand it over to Mr. LaBrage to talk about grant funding.
All right. So as we go through and talk about grant funding tonight, a quick headline, which is that grant funding is the money that's provided to the Hopkinton Public Schools and other public schools that is outside of local and state funding. It is almost always, the second headline I'll give you, which you've heard me say before, is it's almost always designed to supplement and not supplant, which means that in almost every case, a term of the grant award means that we may not use it to fund something we're already doing, but rather to supplement and make better through a program enhancement or expenditure. So when we look at grant categories, grants come in 2 general categories as we talk about funding the Hopkinton Public Schools. The first is a state or federal grant. This typically comes from a state legislative earmark or through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's grant funding program. The other category is a private grant. Now these would be from companies or not-for-profit agencies that make grant funding available. Locally, the Hopkinton Education Foundation would be an example of a local nonprofit private operation that provides grant funding to the Hopkinton Public Schools. If we're talking about just public funding sources, there are really two areas to think about. The first one comes from the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was passed in 2015. This is an amended version of the original Federal Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which has as its focus ensuring improved outcomes for all students receiving public elementary and secondary education. I should actually add, it's not just public, but also for Title I would also include us working with our partners in the private education world as well. In return for the funding that we get through the Every Student Succeeds Act, we are required to comply with the various legal requirements of the law that come with that. So examples of that would be our title grants and then funding that we get through IDEA, which I'll go into in a moment. The other category from public funding sources would be targeted funding. This would be thinking about DESE might put out a grant for a project that has been identified as a priority area in the state of Massachusetts, and they might put some money out for us to be able to apply for. And then state earmarks. You heard Dr. Kavanaugh talk earlier tonight about the $160,000 in earmark money that Hopkinton will be able to make use of in FY24. There are two types of grants. Is everyone following along? I'm giving you lots of categories tonight. All right, there's two types of grants. The first one is an entitlement grant. Now, entitlement grants are awarded based on formulas set forth through laws and regulations. These are things that we are entitled to based on our numbers, based on our demographics, which of course in Hopkinton are shifting more than most other communities in the Commonwealth. We have to comply with a series of programmatic requirements in order for us to be not only eligible for them, but for us to be able to continue to receive those monies. The other category is a competitive grant. These are the ones we get competitive over. These are always awarded on the basis of eligibility following an application. We are not entitled to these. These are monies that come to us based on the review of a grant reading team. They truly are awards that come to us based on how we apply for them. Now, those federal entitlement grants, I'm going to go through two categories. The first one, specific to special education. The first one is IDEA, which is an abbreviation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There's a federal special education entitlement grant that comes through that. And that is designed specifically to make sure that students eligible students with disabilities are able to receive a free and appropriate public education. We affectionately refer to that as FAPE, and to have that happen in the least restrictive environment, or the LRE. Now, the ECSE, or the Early Childhood Special Education Grant, this is very similar to IDEA, but it's specific to students eligible who are ages 3 to 5. And this is to make sure that they are able to receive not only special education, but also the related services that they might need at that early childhood level to meet their needs. Again, FAPE and LRE. There is a quiz. There is a quiz at the end of this.
You can look on your neighbor's paper.
All right, so we have three.
It won't help much.
All right,
Adam, I want to look at your paper later.
So the federal government offers 22 federal Every Student Succeed Act programs. They are categorized in 9 titles, and Hopkinton is eligible for 4 of those titles. Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the title grants, and you've heard us probably talk about these before, but in a quick headline, what we can use this money for. We talked earlier about how the money is restricted, and there are pretty significant guidelines about what can and cannot be used with this money. So Title I, the spirit of the Title I regulation is that we're working to improve basic programs that we operate in our schools. And this is specific to students who have a need. And we can take need going in a variety of different directions. But where is there an unmet need, and how can we use this money to supplement what we're currently doing to make the learning experience even better? Title II is about supporting effective instruction. This grant really anchors around how we can not only support but strengthen our teacher force, and how we can make sure that our students have the best educators in front of them. Title III is specific to language instruction for English learners as well as immigrant students. And Title IV is a fund that funds student support and academic enrichment. Here in Hopkinton, we typically look at Title I and use that money for tutors for students. Title II, we have been using that to make sure that our new educators are able to participate in a robust mentoring and induction program. Our Title III funding is used in different ways. Right now, we're using it to fund an English language acquisition tutor, as well as to support a summer program to make sure that our English learners are able to come back to school fully ready for the new school year ahead of them. And then in Title IV, we've done a number of things with this. We are using that in part to fund a general education summer intervention program. You heard me a few weeks ago seek your approval for funding a math summer enrichment coordinator teacher leader position. That comes out of this grant. And we're also looking forward to reviewing our elementary science curriculum using this money as well. With all of these grants, there are allowable costs and there are unallowable costs. And the state does a very nice job of giving us a beautiful T-chart of a yes you may and a don't you dare. And we look at that as we make our decisions for how we use that money. So there is a process that you can follow along as we acquire this money. For the entitlement grants, the grantor, which is the state through DESE, will announce an award. The district prepares and submits an application for that fund use. So again, this is money that the figure has already been determined. Hopkinton, you are going to get $80,000 to use for X. So at that point, it now comes to me to say, all right, what's Hopkinton's proposal for how we're going to spend that money? So we'll prepare that, we'll send that in, it gets reviewed, it's either sent back to us because we didn't dot an I, we didn't cross a T, that never happens, but hypothetically, or otherwise it comes back and we are told that it's approved and good to go. At that point, we come before you so that the school committee can vote to accept the funds so that we can put those to use. And then the grant is administered. The special education student services grants are administered by the Director of Student Services. The remainder of the grants are things that I oversee. This is both the administration of the grants as well as subsequent reporting that the granting agency often is expecting from us. A very similar pattern for competitive grants. The only difference here is that the grantor, which is again typically DESE, but again it could be any one of those private, public, or private, nonprofit, or for-profit agencies, is going to announce the available grant funding opportunity through a request for proposals. We will jump on that. We will submit one of those proposals. Again, the grant is reviewed. They're typically reviewed by review teams or reading teams. They will determine how much, if any, of the award we will receive. We get that letter. We get really excited. We come to you and ask again for your vote to accept. And similar to the entitlement grants, we implement those. And those almost entirely will be administered through my office.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add is, as you're writing these grants, they do ask you for data so that, they'll say, if you're going to take money and apply it to a particular program, they'll say, well, what evidence do you have that program might need some augmentation, right? And then after you've administered the funds and the year has gone, eventually there will be an audit of all your grants, and so you have to show how did we use them and your intended results. Did they come to be or did they not come to be?
So here you can see our award list of the entitlements and earmarks. So again, this was the money that really was owed to us. Probably could choose a better word than owed to, but the money that we're entitled to. In fact, let's call them entitlement grants. So the money that we're entitled to. You can see that in the fiscal year just behind us, we were able to receive and work with $1,171,595. And as of right now, our projection for FY24, I say projection because we have not secured any of this money, although the money has been dedicated. So now we just have to go through the process of applying to put a plan in place to use it, at which point hopefully that money will come to us. And then we will come again before you and ask for your vote to approve it. We're hoping that we're going to be looking to have you approve $1,344,000 for use of entitlement grants this year. And then finally, our competitive grant. This is kind of our trophy wall, if you'll, so to speak. Of course, our friends at the Hopkinton Education Foundation are always generous and supportive of the teaching and learning taking place in the district. You can see just north of $15,000 was received this year. You've heard us talk a lot about our excitement around the SEL grant of $100,000 that we were able to put into use this year. We were also working with a new math program as a result of the Accelerated Math Instruction Competitive Grant. And last summer, you recall, we talked about some great summer work that we were able to do as a result of the After School, Out of School Time grant. Right now, a couple of those grants are, we are looking to see how we might be able to continue those in the year ahead. And the one that we are most excited about, as of right now, although that can change, Amanda, I'm looking at you, is our Computer Science Engage grant, which we have submitted an application following DESE's RFP. So we will see what that magic number at the bottom is. I can't emphasize enough how important the word competitive is, both in the grant process, but also in my psychology.
All right, and that's it. Budget process will begin again on September 1st.
Wow. Thank you for that very...
Under a month.
For putting all of this together for us. Also, thank you, Holly, for having kind of brought forward the idea of doing a presentation like this to begin with.
This is much more than I had ever imagined in my brain. So I appreciate that. I like that you go a little bit further because I feel like in my heart I liked it.
Slides available for viewing?
We can have Georgette put it on the website for sure. Yeah.
I tried to write everything down.
So I know I have several questions, but I'm sure other people do as well.
Too much information for me to even think about a question.
Adam, do you have anything that pops out that you want to ask?
The first question that comes to mind for me is when you talk about and I forget which funding line it is, with I think it's with the IDEA funding. Mm-hmm. And does I know that kind of falls under Abby's domain. Mm-hmm. Does that require input, feedback, interest from groups such as CPAC, or is it strictly fall within her purview?
Yeah, it usually falls within the purview of the grant writer.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, as Jeff said, with all of these grants, the restrictions about what you can spend them on, it's pretty significantly limiting. You know, a lot of our paraprofessionals are paid for out of the IDEA grant. And when we go back to the pie chart where we talk about 80% salary and 20% expense, I mean, so you do see that there's a lot of people who can be paid for out of that $970,000.
Is that typical?
Sure, I appreciate that answer. I just wanted to sort of get that out there so that everybody's kind of starting on the same point. And just for the sake of transparency.
Sure. And, if you look at those first two grants, they're both special education grants, and they're totaling about $1 million. So if you look at that whole column and it's 1.3 million, the other title grants that Jeff spends hours and hours writing, the dollar amounts don't sort of compare to the special education grants. Not that he isn't working super hard.
I just can't see the slide deck from my view here.
Do you want to turn him so he can face the...
I'm turning you, Adam.
Can you see that?
Do you want to share
Certainly, so you can see my paper.
presentation with him?
That's on my own.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Susan, can you let him know that Susan's going to share this whole thing with him in a moment?
Yes, Susan's going to be sharing this whole thing with you in a minute. Not this Susan, that Susan. The
That's fine, I'm sure it'll be well worth the wait. Thank you, Susan.
The technologically enhanced Susan.
That may stick as a nickname, I'm just...
Yes.
Did you have any questions? I know it's a lot of information.
Just too much information for me to have a question at this point.
You'll soon be living it, so.
I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
I mean,
This helps an awful lot beginning as a warm-up.
Well, I think I'm glad that also the community gets to see and understand how everything's funded, because I think it's a lot to do with the ESBC, but I get some real wacky questions about funding, like, what about all that COVID money? And I was like, what's all this COVID money?
What COVID money?
So, you know, to see actually where the origins of all the different programs and projects that we have are funded, I think it's incredibly valuable for everybody in the community that participates or is interested in school funding, which right now is everybody, it seems like. So thank you very much.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One thing I always forget when we talk about the schools is that we can't start before September. Like, even if we wanted to start earlier or not cram a whole school's worth of new students on top of in September on the teachers and also ask them to do budgeting in the same month, we really can't because the teachers aren't here. So I think, you know, we have that unique challenge of arriving just in time to get school underway and then project what you need next year, which is a huge challenge, and I'm really thankful for our administrators and our teachers for going through that process in September when, you know, we're all trying to get our kids out the door for the first day of school and everything else is going on. So just a comment there.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
The other piece that holds us back from starting is the town charter that lays out the timeline that we have the conversation with the select board. And for those who can't see, I am pointing to the select board chair who's in our attendance here. But that dictates a part of our timeline as well.
Yeah, but even if we wanted to like get a little head of the game and think a little bit ahead in July when things are quiet, we're not here. So there's that challenge. So that was just a comment. I try to do really quick back of the napkin math, so it's probably off. Looking at the slide, it showed the 4 years with enrollment numbers and budget. And just, again, back the napkin, it looked like if we divide the total budget increase by the student increase, it looked like around $20,000 a student, which is more than our per pupil expenditure, which in my head I was thinking that speaks to the different student profiles that are coming in with unique needs, maybe more than like the average among the other 4,000 students. Like some of the new students are bringing in different needs or different supports that may make the budget needs to accommodate their requirements a little bit higher than the average.
Yes, I was thinking of that as well, because I did the same
little
math.
math,
I was thinking like about that idea of plateau, like every X number of students we have to add a teacher, so it kind of makes sense, right? Like there's going to be a little more than per pupil expenditure because you might be having classrooms and desks and all that stuff.
Does that math subtract out, it would seem to me that you would subtract out what it is gotten through grants out of that number too?
I would assume that lags.
This is just the general fund. This
Right.
does not include the grants, these
Right.
numbers.
And the formulas that would account for the students who are new in like this year, the formulas would sweep them in next year, right? So like they show up in the school in September, but whatever formula governed the entitlement grant for this year didn't know about them.
Right.
Right, so they'll know about them next year, and so then it lags a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just interesting thought. I thought it was interesting.
Inflation, when we talk about inflation and we're looking at these numbers, like clearly a dollar spent today is going to be worth a lot less than a dollar spent 2 years ago, 4 years ago. So when we talk about our budget, we're asking for X% overage, but we're not necessarily accounting for inflation, right? Like we're still $15,000 a student as we were 3 years ago, but that money doesn't go quite the same distance, right?
Right.
I find that to be kind of impressive in a way that's also kind of a bummer, and for lack of a better term.
And my last comment was just thank you so much for the grant explanation, because for someone not living in your world, it is, even after all these years on the school committee, it is a little bit hard to, remember which ones are entitlement and competitive, and I always think it's a much bigger number than it actually is. We do a lot with that grant money because we'll have, you know, the paraprofessionals, like critical resources that we're able to fund. It's just not a lot of, like when I was looking at it, like that's, I was going to ask you what percentage of the total budget, and then you showed the numbers. It's not nearly what I thought based on impression of what we do with it.
You know, like Dr. Kavanaugh said, it is a lot of effort, and not just on my part, but on all my colleagues who collaborate to put these proposals together. It is a lot for, I don't want to say a little, and because little amounts can add up.
Yeah.
But you know, you hear headlines about a grant for $4 million. That's not what we're talking about. You know, the state will sometimes put out an RFP that will say, hey everyone, come on and apply, and the total available pot of money might be $70,000. And so the state's going to decide, you know, everyone can have a little bit, or you few can have a chunk of it.
Yeah.
You also talked about getting started earlier with the grants, and I think it's important to note that we just probably 2 or 3 weeks ago got the allocations for what the entitlement grants figures were going to be for this year. And so the process, one of the things we do in the summer is then start the application process of how we're going to use that money. With the operating budget, we're a year out. With the entitlement grants, we're about a month out.
Interesting.
So we have a, you know, history tells us there's a pattern that if it was this amount this year, it's not going to shift too much, but it is something that we are constrained in when we can work on.
Thanks. So I'm going to start piggybacking off of your comments and the comments in general about the amount of money in the grant relative to the amount of effort. I think it speaks volumes about how seriously we take our fiduciary responsibility that you go so aggressively after not just the entitlement grants, but I know as well off of the competitive ones as well. So that is much appreciated, and it helps us with important things that we're able to do, even if it doesn't bring up the percentage of our budget significantly.
And there are different people across the district who will say, oh, did you see that funding opportunity? Sometimes I may or may not get emails from Dr. Kavanaugh that say, oh, what do you think about this one? And that's all the email says. I say, I think I like that one. But you know, it's you know, there are some opportunities that we really can do. The computer science grant is a great example of something that just happens. The state put it out there at the same time that we as a district were talking about this as a priority we wanted to move to a front burner.
And that one's not necessarily the money, as much as it is that the state's going to put together a cohort of people in our community to think about over a multi-year time frame, what would computer science look like? How could it be augmented in your district? So the thinking almost outweighs the cash that you would get for that grant as well.
So I'm going to circle back now to the beginning towards the beginning, and the first thing that jumped out at me is the revolving accounts, in part because I know that we've been, when I say we, I mean you, put a lot of thought into how we were using those last year. And this came out of a conversation that happened in the community about revolving funds and looking at, you know, we were able to do things like fund assistant athletic coaches, in part for safety, a large part out of the athletic revolving account. And just want to, I guess, emphasize what you had said. And there was a slide before this that said it very nicely, just about how the expenditure comes, no, I'm not, but that it comes out of money that has to be used for, like the athletic fees have to go towards athletic. Correct. They can't be transferred to something else. And that there are legal pieces, so that, for example, we couldn't create, legally, we could not create something like a special education revolving fund to be able to have that, because we can't pull from the funding sources the other way, and we would not be able to carry that money in our budget.
So just to piggyback on this, what surprised me was if you look at Mass General Law, like I don't know why I didn't realize this, they actually name these. Like we don't make these up.
Right.
Like they're actually named in law.
Yes, that's right.
And how they can be used. And I went and looked at it a couple of years ago, and I was like, okay, we didn't make this up. I didn't know.
And while it would be nice if we were able to add one or two things that are important to us and priorities to make sure that we're able to fund them at the needed level always, we legally can't do that.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Right. So,
And none of us wants to go to jail, so.
but I don't think people realize that. That was
I know.
yeah.
And that, it was a great conversation that happened in the community, and just when you put that slide up, it made me think of
Yes,
that.
and I think what's really important too to notice about this is in many cases, these are things that families are paying for additionally. So if they're paying an athletic fee or a parking fee, bus fees, that's why those accounts are sort of fluctuate so much because people are coming into, my child got his license in January, now I want to buy a parking spot, so.
The next thing I had was on the capital planning and the 5-year piece, and to kind of circle back to the conversation we had last week. It feels like a year ago, but it wasn't. Just the capital planning and looking at the 5 years out, and how we've had this conversation a couple times recently, both last spring when we talked about it again, and then again last week. And coming out of last week's meeting, I was thinking about the impact of it was like $85 million worth of things that we pulled out of that 5-year budget, and I think that's an important piece that we're looking at, the fiduciary responsibility we have to the town, and we're looking at how we can make things affordable for taxpayers, but also really prioritizing what we do. So that, and the other piece, if I can circle back to last week's presentation again, is the preschool and central office admin building we took off last spring. Is that right? Because it does not appear in last week's.
That's correct. Yeah. So, the preschool central office building, we were looking at the fact that we rent the central office building. So was there an opportunity for that in the future? So this again gets back to the fact and why the capital plan 5-year look is still reviewed annually, because you have, again, all those if-then statements. And so the focus became really more on the Marathon School and all the schools using that district, planning study that we did, and what are the opportunities, again, if the Elmwood School goes forward as a project, now the old Elmwood School is available potentially for a preschool, for a central office, so those are the if-then statements that you have to follow along.
And I think kind of to look back at those if-then, when I think back to the conversations that were happening last budget season between last November and January, which were possibly the longest of the entire last decade. But what the town was looking at was all of the projects that, including the preschool and central office building. So the number that we have taken out from what the town was looking at, or that we're considering taking out, is actually over $100 million in projects. So I think that's important just to underscore and to thank you for the deep look at the if-then statements. So, and then one last question because I do have a lot of questions tonight, on the grants. Actually, 2 things. One is a statement more than a question, but the title grants in looking at the special education, that does not fund our entire special education budget, obviously.
Oh,
yeah.
no.
I just wanted to clarify that for
Not
people.
even a little bit. No.
I knew that, but I wanted to make sure we clarified that for people at home. And I know you had said that most of these grants that we're getting that are 1 year only, that we can't, I think you said to augment the budget, not to...
to supplement and not supplant.
But there are some, I know it sounds like paraprofessionals and I think tutors that are able to fall under the title grants.
So you actually can, if you supplement 1 year, and you can subsequently do the same.
Okay.
The way I guess I could describe it is if you move it out of a grant and into your operating for 1 year, or honestly for 45 seconds, if you move it in, you've now said we can handle this in our operating. And as a result, if we were to the next year say, oh, we want to, they said, oh no, because now you're supplanting what you've placed in your operating budget.
That's an excellent explanation. Thank you.
Can I ask one more question? So something we've talked about a lot over the last year is how the needs of our students are kind of increasing and becoming more complex. Has the money that we have gotten from the state for these purposes, has it kept up the pace with the student needs? And I can kind of tell by your face that it's like a big no.
I'll say it out loud, no. I mean, it's just, I think that the parity that you saw about our, the annual budget as relates, and Holly, you said this, the way that our annual budget relates to our enrollment yeah, there's a little bit of a correspondence with our enrollment growth and the increase, but if you factor in any sliver of inflation, it throws it all out of whack.
Right.
And I would argue the same thing is true for in the entitlement grant funding.
See, like, it just feels to me like these grants are essential for the proper running of our special education classrooms, right?
I
Like,
mean, they are government assurances based in the law that says we want to make sure that every school can meet the basic needs of all of their students.
And I think really the piece of that is the biggest is the Chapter 70 money.
Yes.
And so when we looked at that 12.1% increase,
That's wonderful.
that is based in exactly what you're talking about, changes in numbers and needs.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad that the state acknowledges that
Yes.
we have this as well.
Our Senate president said that that's why she originally ran for office, is because of the funding formula for Chapter 70.
Yeah, I
She's done a lot
know
of
she
work to
was a
change it.
social worker,
And a
right?
school committee member.
School committee member, yeah,
She
she
was,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, she's excellent. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else before we move on?
I have just one. I saw a comment. This is just not a comment about like does the school have a PR agent? I just want to say your presentation was excellent. I know that we don't have a PR person. It's you guys doing this, and you did a really great job. You always do with the clarity and the thoroughness of what you do. And I really appreciate how you put this together in a way that we can understand it, and it's thorough. It's not superficial. It's deep, but it's also understandable. So thank you.
100% agree with that. So, thank you. That
We're calling it budgeting 101.
I would say this might be 101 plus the 201 class.
Grant section.
All right, so that moves us then into the working session planning. So this is an opportunity, we have the working session on, it's August 24th, I think. Yes. August 24th, it is a daytime thing. It's our opportunity to have some, a little bit more, less, I guess formal would be the structure, and to have, work together in what we want to move forward.
Where is it?
Town hall, is that, am I right? Town hall basement.
Ooh.
Oh, and that,
Shaking it up a little bit.
starting at,
Is it 8? Did I make that up?
I think it was 9 to 1, and I asked Nancy if we could consider an 8 to noon so that I could work a half day. But if people can't start before, then it's just easier from a work perspective.
come in my jammies.
It's a childcare issue. If I can get somebody at my house at 8,
Okay.
I don't have a problem with it starting whatever, right? Will somebody be?
TBD. Do you wanna
TBD,
let
if we
it-
could
Yeah.
maybe firm that up in the next week so that we can have a definitive start time, but that
Yeah.
would be great. Is that okay with you, Adam?
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever time the group decides is fine with me. 8 o'clock is fine, 9 o'clock is fine, whatever time. 8 o'clock is fine.
Okay, great. Are there topics that people have that they want to make sure that we do informing the agenda, things that, for me, one thing I want to talk about is goals, and looking at what our goals as a committee are for the next year, and set the framework up so that we can kind of figure out at a checkpoint what we expect to achieve, and then hope to achieve by the end. If people don't have any off the top of your head, you could send them and we could.
I'm a stranger in a strange land.
Well, that's fresh perspective is always good. All right, then let's move into the superintendent's goals and indicators.
Okay. So I have already presented the goals once sort of formally in this setting, and I know that I had sent you the goals again last week, and I included the disciplinary literacy back into it. And I did that. Still abroad slinking, he can't hear it anymore. But we wanted to take some time to really assess if that's working. So we put it back in there. One of the things that, and I'll just say this briefly and then we can move on, and it's really part of my curriculum indicator as well, but we were one of the school districts that said, sure, Desi, we will pilot the civics MCAS test in the spring for all of our 8th graders. So we had over 300 8th graders take the civics pilot. statewide, there were just over 6,000 kids who did it. So about 5% of those test takers were from Hopkinton, Massachusetts. But the second question, you can actually go in and take a look at the entire test. You can take it yourself. You see all the questions, you see all the answers. But the second question required kids not only to answer questions about freedom of the press, but they had to read a map. And I think for me, that's a really good example of disciplinary literacy, right? Are you able to take some text that is not prose like we typically think about with reading, and can they make meaning of a map? Not just answer a question like, color in Ghana, but it was Australia, Ghana, and the United States were all blue in terms of the way they approach freedom of the press. So I thought, I looked at our 8th grade scores, and about 78% of the kids are meeting or exceeding the standard in ELA. And then I looked at the MCAS civics, and 75% of the kids got that question right. But statewide, it was only like 53. Now, granted, we were 5% of the test takers, and we don't know who the other districts were who agreed to participate in this. But I thought that's really nice that those two things are matching when the reading task is just a little bit different. So, we want to take a look at things like, is the reading of the map, or was it the understanding of the civics, or what did the other districts look like? What was the sort of caliber of the district that we're taking them. So we have a lot of unanswered questions yet, which is why I put it back in there, just so you have a sense of why it's there. I was planning to go through the indicators if that makes sense to you right now. I can do that, I think, pretty quickly. I can make them very large on that screen. The first two I put together. I usually put a colored bar between them, but I married curriculum and instruction here. I put curriculum in this year because we are going to have to think about how the curriculum will change if grade 6 moves into the Hopkins School and it's now paired with grade 5. We made a promise to the MSBA that we would look at the Elmwood 2, 3, 4 curricula, and we promised we would do that because when the physical plant changes, we will be afforded an opportunity to do a lot more in terms of teaching and learning than what is, typically happening in Elmwood now due to space constraints and facility constraints. In fact, when we presented the educational plan, we were met with some pretty stern questioning around that about whether or not we would be revising 2, 3, 4 curricula. And hopefully there'll be more inquiry-based kind of active learning when that building is open. We have a upcoming civics test, so even though we took the pilot, that's going to become a tested subject area. The grade 5, 8, and 10 MCAS is also changing now because they're going to start including questions that indicate that kids know how to do science, not just answer science-based questions. And we have the computer science grant on the horizon, and then we've been talking about grade 6 math curriculum for some time. In terms of instruction, there are just a couple of places where I want to keep working on that. You know that we're putting the CRI-OP in, and one of my messages to everyone on opening day is that we can't have cultural proficiency live in one silo and academic rigor live in another silo. Those two things have to intersect with one another. Because if I am a kid who feels sort of culturally part of the fabric of the community, I'm going to do a whole lot better in that classroom. And if I'm a kid who's succeeding academically, I'm going to feel good about myself and want to engage with that culture. So the two things absolutely positively go hand in hand, and we can't leave them in isolation. And I think we may have been doing that because some of the feedback that we're getting from faculty and staff is it's either or for me. I can either focus on the academics or I can focus on the cultural proficiency. Which one would you like me to do? And I think that there are ways that we can look at those two things as intertwined. We also have our MCAS growth scores, and if you take a look at where our kids are in terms of achievement, they're looking good. If we look at 2019 compared to 2022, the achievement scores may have gone down like 2 points. So all students could have been 519 before, now they're 517, for example. That I think it's post-pandemic, so we're hoping that those numbers will go back up a little bit. But what's really comforting to me is I look at the kids' SGP scores, which is how they're growing compared to their cohorted peers across Massachusetts. Our kids are well above 50 in all of those categories. The only place where we're not seeing the bounce back that I want to see is in some of our moderate special education student scores, which I think speaks to a lot of the work that we've been doing with co-teaching, specially designed instruction, and I'm hoping to do a little bit of case study work this year. What was the experience of our kids who did not choose a traditional college path when they left Hopkinton High School? And I think there may only be 3 or 4 of those kids, but I would love to be able to get some interview time with them if they're willing. I left student learning in there, and again, the data we unearthed as we examined our special education scores. So we see some performance discrepancies with our SWD kids, and again, just really thinking about that. So right now, I can say that for all of our kids in achievement, we have about 75 to 80% who are meeting or exceeding expectations. That's great. Would I love to see them all at 80? I absolutely would. But I want to make sure that our SGP subgroups for all of our grades, all of our kids in every grade level, so not just our students with disabilities, but if we're looking at like our Hispanic and Latino kids or any one of those groups, I would love to see those SGP scores to be above 50% consistently.
So Dr. Kavanaugh, are we also looking at the socioeconomic? Do we have that subgroup for them?
We do,
Okay.
yes. Yep. And it used to be, so you used to have at least 20 kids in the grade, I think, for them to be considered cohorted, and they would give you a number. We used to not get that number because we didn't have that number of students, but we do now. So we are getting reports on them. I left in law, ethics, and policies. As you know, a huge part of my job really is to guard the district against potential liability, model ethical behavior, engage with all the bargaining units, and I think that this year we have contract negotiations with the paras, the custodians, and the cafeteria workers. Policy work, we're already off and running. We've had 2 so far this summer, but the policy working group does a pretty darn good job, in my esteemed opinion. We have our monthly meetings with the HTA. I talked by phone yesterday in lieu of a meeting this month with the association president. Updates on legal issues with our school committee chair and vice chair very frequently. So I left that one in. Fiscal systems, again, budget season, always a little bit challenging, but given our change in demographics and the numbers of kids that we have, and coming on the heels of a budget system season last year that I think eroded the trust of some of our parent groups, I am really hoping that this budget season is one where we are able to clearly articulate and transparently articulate all of the asks and offer data and a sound rationale for the things that we are in fact asking for. And I think I won't go through all of these things because you just saw them all in that presentation, but you know just how long and complicated the budget process is. I put in 3C communication, and I kind of married that also to cultural proficiency. In past years, we've been working hard on improving our communications with families about student learning and student performance, and I think this year we have tools in our toolbox that haven't previously existed for us. So this year, our Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access, and the teachers will be fully involved in the placement of ELL students at the elementary level, and I think that that's really important. We've had a lot of involvement in the placement of kids who have either behavioral needs or special education needs, but now our ELL students are also going to be put into that process. We have now a full complement of tools used for communications. So we have Message Sender for email translations, Talking Points for text translations. So Jen Zucker can text with any parent who speaks another language, and those texts will go back and forth in the appropriate languages. At the building level, people are using SMORE for communications. So when we put things out, we used to have a different kind of publishing tool, but the publishing tool that we used to use, it didn't translate like SMORE will. For any legal documents, we use professional services, and we've budgeted for that now. And then in terms of interpretation, which is when you need someone to be in a meeting to speak, not to translate text, we have not only local people who we have a nice interpreter list, but we have also signed on to something called Lexikit, and for all of the languages we have in the district now, we can get on-demand interpretation, which is amazing, I think. So I'm really pleased to be able to offer that to our families.
Is that by like a video like they're able to
Yes.
videos? That's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's like hospital translation.
Yeah.
And you know that we've got the CRI-OP now in every single school improvement plan, so as the building principals come in and show you their SIPs this year, you're going to see that across the board. And Jen Suker plans to have interviews with any of the multilingual families who need them or want them, which I think when we have people who are joining our district, it's really nice to have that kind of, concierge service. It's really lovely to be welcomed that way. And so in terms of cultural proficiency, we have tools again that we haven't had in previous years. So we will have the results of our equity audit. We talked with the equity auditors today. They would like to come in either September 21st or October 5th to make a presentation formally to this body and to the community. And we'll be taking the information we glean from that and, be able to start dismantling some barriers. After all of our work with Blackprint, the CRI-OP is finally in classrooms. I know we've talked about it so many times with the administrators doing work and walkthroughs, and now it's in the hands of the teachers, so that's nice. And then I think the presentation that Jen Suker, Colin Rose, who is our Blackprint guy, and I made at the MAS conference really talks about our trajectory over time and what other districts can learn from our experience. Continuous learning. Again, that's not just our all means all, but our this year all really can mean all. We have something now called Unified Insights, thanks to the work of Jeff and Mr. Ghosh. So maybe the lion's share of that work through Mr. Ghosh, but we can go into Power School and a teacher can look at her classroom and see all of the STAR scores and the MCAS scores and some of the great big scores, BAS scores, HSA scores, all of that stuff for her kids. So if I'm a teacher and I realize that I have a student who's not making the kind of progress I want to see, everything about that child, at least in terms of data, is right there in front of me. So it's an incredible tool for us to have now to support the teachers and in doing so to support the kids. I also think that's the kind of data that we're hoping to be able to leverage in our PLCs. So over on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of the tools that you'll be able to take a look at as I continue to present evidence, but all of the agendas from professional learning days, building-based meetings, staff meetings, elementary school leadership, secondary school leadership, it's all there. Last year I had shared vision in this. I made it a goal this year, but I'm keeping the indicator here as well. Again, one of the things I want to look at here really is what's happening with our kids post-high school. And so the case study work that I've talked about will fall into this indicator. And we also have, I know I had sent you a sort of copy of what her survey looks like, but Dr. Judith Martin will be kind of following the class of 2023 and getting feedback from them, really asking them, how did your experience in the Hopkinton Public Schools, but probably mostly at Hopkinton High School, impact your trajectory in your first year out? And then exploring more CVTE work, the comp sci work, thinking about why our kids are or are not choosing Keefe Tech. Should there be more students who would benefit from vocational technical education? We don't know that. So I think I have maybe 9 or 10 indicators here. These are the ones I've chosen, but naturally we can work as a group to think about what would be appropriate and what you'd like to see.
That's a lot of information.
It's a lot, yes, and you never approve any of this tonight, so it's something for you to certainly marinate.
Okay. Any questions or thoughts that people want to share tonight?
I have one, it's not in here and it might not be something we want to put in here, and I didn't send it to you in advance, but I'm just curious if we are comfortable. I never hear us talk much about when you said fiscal systems, our systems, like the systems that Susan relies on, which I know are part and parcel with the town systems as well, like Munis or whatever, but whether it's HR or time tracking or I know that I have not seen come to us a budget ask for any investments in that area. And just, I guess I'm just throwing it out there because I had raised it a couple years ago, I think. If it's something that we need to talk about, as we grow, efficiency is key, especially to get the most out of the people who work here. And if our processes and our systems are not efficient, then we're going to just need more people. This happens all the time everywhere. You know, it's either more people or better tools. And I'm throwing it out there. I would like to see us maybe at some point look at our tools.
We have an answer for you. So
Okay.
we have started the process of moving from any kind of paper, paid time off, all of that, into automating it.
Okay.
And so we're doing that through Munis, which is a system that we share with the town. I don't think that Mrs. Rothermick has done anything else in the last 2 weeks except for spend all of her time with the Munis representative and setting up accounts. So we've had some trial runs. So for example, I can go in and I can look at all of the people now who are my direct reports. And it will tell me what licenses they have. It will tell me all about their paid time off. It will tell me about their sick time. We had some folks in there who didn't belong, and we're really cleaning all of that data so that we can use it very effectively. Our goal, I think, once school starts, is to just start with a very small group of teachers and paraprofessionals and educators. And I think that we might be choosing the integrated preschool because there are about 25 of them. They have some time on Wednesday mornings if we need to sit down with them and say, okay, what are you really struggling with, so that we can clean those things up. And when we bring it to the rest of our faculty and staff, you know, we've worked out some of the kinks. So that's.
I had no idea you were doing that. So.
Oh, she doesn't do anything else, nor should she. Nor could she.
No, so I think that's great. I don't know if that factors into that fiscal systems, but there's another one that I think is like HR. There are a few different indicators in that group, but I'm thrilled that we're looking at that. So thank you. And I just budget-wise, is Munis something that we don't pay our license? Does that not come to us? Is that part of the town?
It is, it's part of the town. You know, and I will say, Munis is extremely expensive,
Yeah.
but it is the most powerful engine out there from a financial package for a municipality. So what we're working on doing is really utilizing more of the modules and more of what is available to us. And so this is one of the processes that we're looking to do, again, to your point, as we have grown, the business office and the human resources department has not. So we're really looking to streamline procedures, utilizing Munis more effectively, and make sure that they are time saving. So we did go through one of the processes that we've already implemented. We did a check back with Munis and just said, you know, so far we're not really seeing time saving. And so we went through exactly, you know, employee by employee, who's doing what step, and really what it came down to is it's still just a learning curve, and will eventually improve and save time. So in the beginning, it's going to be clunky and maybe not save time, and will drag people kicking and screaming, but the end result is we're looking for that efficiency because we're very small for a very large number of employees.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. Thank you.
And I should say thank you to Mrs. Polnick and Dr. Ghosh as well.
Yes.
I mean, they have also put in countless hours.
Yeah.
Anybody else before we move on? Okay, and that, thank you very much for all of that. Again, looking at the depth of the reports that you have had in the presentations tonight, it's been a busy week for you. So that brings us into the superintendent annual review. This comes out of a conversation we had a couple weeks ago now, that Holly, you had brought forward about the potential to move to doing an every other year review as opposed to, excuse me, how we have done the annual review for the superintendent.
Just because of something that we had discussed last year was doing a district evaluation. And I don't know if it's necessary, but my We have like the ESBC coming up in our budget process, which is like typically very
hard to hear.
very time consuming. The budget process is time consuming. We have the ESBC vote coming up in November. We have other 5-year capital plan to discuss with the community. My fear would be is that we wouldn't be able to do a good district eval, or I don't want to shortchange Dr. Kevin or the district. So it's really a time thing, and maybe it's just me because I overthink things. That could possibly be the problem, but it was something I thought would be maybe a good conversation to have with the rest of the board, and maybe this can be a topic of conversation for our morning meeting. I do not know. I don't know if that's a better venue for it. Maybe not. Maybe that is also.
No, I actually hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, I just am recovering. I'm negative, but I'm recovering from COVID, so my brain is kind of not working linearly. So
I'm not sure any of our brains are. Maybe the other three people.
It's gone. I've lost a large percentage of the knowledge I once previously held. So, that's something to the board, that what people think, including Dr. Kavanaugh. It's not a. Yeah.
I would like to discuss the thoughts on a district evaluation at our working session. To kind of look at, brainstorm around what it is that we're looking to get and how to best get that information.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of having these conversations separate, I think we could probably do one without the other tonight. But if people.
So the question, Jen, is do we want to do annual or every other year superintendent? Is that the question you're asking for tonight? I mean, I don't know that they have to be related.
Yeah, it was purely a time consideration because we have a significant number of things in front of us that we have to do for this year, and I want it. Like all of them are, to me, are equal importance. We don't deal in frivolity really, so. I just want to be mindful of the time that we have and the things we wish to accomplish. And
I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking of bringing something new forward to consider.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you want to share any thoughts again? Because I think I would want to start with where your thoughts are on that.
One of the things that I like about the annual review is, and it is a funny thing, because I think even though we say it's an annual review, I think you can see that some of the things that we were working on last year obviously bleed into this year, and then things that we're doing this year will, do the same next year. But I like one of the things I like about it is that it really kind of keeps you on track. So if I know now that in January I come again before this board and say this is the time for the formative assessment, in that it's a short window really between, say, September 1 and I don't know, January 15th, whatever. So you kind of keep on track, and there's one of the things Georgette does for me is she'll set up meetings with all of the players, and so I think it's easy to say, well, I don't really need to meet with that math director, Shelley Moran, because this doesn't really come due till June. And, I like there's a little more urgency, maybe is what I'm trying to say. And the work, in my mind, the work stays on the front burner for me. So I guess that might be why. And then I also think that when we get to June, I get different feedback in a summative evaluation than I get in a formative evaluation. So in June, you really have a sense of what you did and did well. But I think if you move the formative evaluation to June, it feels a little lighter. I don't know. So that's my only. I mean, I could certainly. The teachers who have professional teacher status use the 2-year model. I mean, that's just sort of industry standard.
I am impressed that anyone would willingly sign up
for that
public process. Other thoughts that people have on a 1-year versus a 2-year review?
Sure, Adam here. I would just be curious, what's the approach that other districts are taking? Is there any information on best practices or impact on the outcomes or any of that sort of pertinent information given a 1 year versus a 2 year review?
I think DESE, if I'm not mistaken, I think DESE says for a seasoned superintendent, it's up to the district to choose the model.
Yeah.
You can do either way. For a new superintendent, it's annual. But for a seasoned superintendent like Dr. Kavanaugh, it's up to our district.
Yeah, I think it's like greater than 3 years in the district in the, it's not, but, you know, it's, what if they don't kind of give you like, or what are the guidelines for doing that, so.
And 3 years is the mark for teachers, so
Yeah.
if you have professional teacher status, then you move from I get evaluated every year in this process to you have a 2-year plan.
Right.
You've certainly been here more than 3, but it feels in some ways, some of the years you may have been here made it seem like 10, 20 more than what it is, so.
Could have been that COVID year.
Yep. So I'm inclined, I think, to lean towards where if you're looking for that on an annual basis, to stick with that. Personally, I don't have
No, I can understand why
Yeah.
you would want it on a yearly basis because it keep you on track, you know.
Yeah.
It does feel like a tighter process.
Yeah, which if you have any tendency to want to put it aside and get something else done, that you have that pressure, which is something I would need, definitely.
I mean, you know, the other side of the coin is that you have a lot going on at these meetings as well, so.
All right.
You have to be a good superintendent or the schools won't be as good as they are. So that's the important point.
All right, so let's move the second part of that conversation to the working session, if that's okay. Okay, I think that was a great idea.
Well, do we make a decision?
So, well, if somebody feels like they want to make a motion, I think the status quo would be the fallback. But we also could think about it as part of the working session, unless somebody feels like they would like to.
I didn't really weigh in. I mean, I personally like to give feedback. I just like to get feedback. So I like to do it annually because I like to receive it in a timely way myself at work. So, you know, so I wouldn't personally make a motion to change it unless there were a reason, but maybe it should be coupled with the other discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so that then brings us down into liaison roles. We're wanting to have this conversation as a group of 5, so this is great. One piece that jumped out at me that we did not discuss when we initially had the liaison roles was the fact that this year is a year where we're reviewing our bullying intervention and prevention plan. So I think it makes sense to name who we want to have representing the school committee as part of that group. It's for those who are not familiar with the process. It's every 2 years we have to review. It's a very lengthy document. I want to say it's like 70 pages or something. It's a huge.
It's like a little book.
It's like a little book. There are a lot of legal pieces that go along with it, and there's a fairly good cross-section of individuals on it from the different schools, administrators, teachers. There's students on it, and there is a school committee member on it. It does come to us at the end of the process, which is usually in the early spring, I think, when we vote on what has been done. We do get updates along the way from our liaison. I did that, I think, you and I did it the first year, I think, that we were both here.
3 plans ago.
Like 3 plans ago, but it was a great process. I enjoyed being part of it. I think when I was thinking that we should include this, I was thinking, Holly, you have brought a lot of things, to the discussion about bullying.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee, but I do personally feel that you would be very well suited for this. You've had a lot of ideas and advocacy on this, and I think would be a good voice.
Yeah,
for us.
In my work as a social worker, I work with bullies and people that are bullied. So it's a like you kind of
Match made in heaven.
Isn't it?
I
Oh
think
gosh,
so.
it's interesting because you always hear like the two, like I'm in the middle and get to hear the both. So, but it is something that I think is like a really important conversation. I really appreciate that you thought of me.
Because I would natural.
I would love to do this work on behalf of the district and behalf of this board if everybody thinks that that would be a good choice.
And I think it's good to put that up front ahead before we put the rest of the committee together. So
Yeah.
I would be interested in taking a vote on that specifically. I know we had also talked about the policy working group. If there were thoughts on
That is something that we can leave in the.
All right, so so if we're just looking at the bullying, the school committee representative for the bullying intervention and prevention plan committee.
I cannot imagine anyone more qualified than you. I would make a motion.
Okay.
To, what is the motion? I would make a motion to appoint Holly to the bullying intervention and prevention plan committee.
Thank you.
So a motion by Amanda, a second by Susan, and we'll do a roll call vote, starting with you, Adam.
Aye.
Okay, Susan?
Aye.
Holly?
Aye.
Amanda?
Aye.
And I am also an aye. Thank you very much for taking this on. It is a little bit on the time-consuming piece of it, but it's, I think you will be a tremendous asset to that group, but also to have our voices heard in the communities.
Thank you. This is exactly the kind of work that I wanted to do.
Good.
On the school committee. So,
Perfect match.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are a little bit, actually, we magically caught up to move into policy GBEB, which is staff conduct. This is a second reading. Dr. Kavanaugh, do you want to?
Sure. So Susan, Amanda, and I had met to think about staff conduct because we don't currently have a policy on that, and most districts do, and what we realized through Mass General Law is that we are supposed to. And so the information that you see in this policy, most of the language came right out of the employee handbook. The two pieces that sort of the one piece that didn't is that opening paragraph, and the opening paragraph we did in fact borrow from another district. But otherwise, there it is.
So I had one thing that I wanted to ask, and number 8, fighting or using obscene, abusive, or threatening language or gestures, both written and spoken, whether in person, on social media, or any other forum. That to me felt a bit subjective in a lot of ways, because I feel like if we had in front of this body 10 different posts, we'd all have a spectrum of feelings on all of those things. And I had noted that some other districts have specific social media use policies where they talk about both personal and professional use of social media by staff specifically. And I felt that since this one didn't call out, it's saying this is our expectation while you're in school, on school time versus your personal time versus whether it is a school sanctioned social media account versus a non-school sanctioned social media account. It doesn't account for the many variations that exist. And particularly when we're talking about what somebody might find obscene or threatening, I would imagine that also exists on a pretty broad spectrum. So my fear is that the subjectivity of this could be utilized in both negative and positive ways toward our staff, not necessarily positive in somebody doesn't like what a teacher wrote and they also don't like how their child's experienced in the class and they try to use it in a negative way, or even the way teachers speak about other teachers or what have you, or staff, any sort of staff member. So when I read through this, the whole entire policy sounds great, and that was the only spot where I was like, oh, this seems like it could be
Well,
messy.
there's some examples of social media policies that you can point us to, because I think that was one of the things we were kind of getting at on that.
Yeah, it's a great...
Because it's the one place you can get tripped up so badly.
Right. Franklin has one, Cambridge has one, and Duxbury has one. And I read through them, and 2 of them clearly define social media use for staff, personal social media use for staff, and then versus what are school sanctioned uses for social media. And I think the clearer and more defined it is, maybe the easier it will be for us to understand what falls within that purview versus outside of that purview.
That's good.
That might be a good reason to hold off the second reading of that then.
Oh, we won't vote it anyway. It's still, yeah, we
okay.
still need more, more.
Oh, okay.
We've had many iterations of some policies.
Okay.
Do you guys remember, was number 8 one that we lifted the language exactly out of the staff handbook? Or was that one that we edited? We edited a couple minor edits, but in most cases. I don't remember if that was identical.
I don't think it was identical.
Okay.
I think we may have added things like both written and spoken, whether in person or on social media. I mean, I think we may have clarified the location and modality.
I love the idea of the social media policy. I wanted to bring one for us, back a few years ago, have one for us. I think it's helpful and protective for us if we have one.
Yeah.
I'd love to look at the ones you cited for the staff.
On there, those policies exist on a spectrum as well. So you'll see one where you're like, this is very good, and the other ones are like, eh. But you get to see. Those are the 3 I found, just like searching.
Do I go to their
If you, I could send them all to the board, not for deliberation. Not for deliberation.
I would love to.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Send it to all of you.
That's great. Okay.
Was there anything else that?
Everything else seemed like very clearly defined as like a very good policy. That's the only place I was like,
Yeah.
Did the policies tonight go out to the public? Today?
Yeah.
Okay. And any feedback?
I haven't received
Okay.
anything.
I have not. All right, so that gives you, okay, that's great. That then brings us into, unless, is there anything else, anybody else wanted to add before we move on? Okay. Moves us then into policy BCA, which is school committee member ethics.
Do you want to cover that, Amanda, since that was the meeting I missed?
Oh, right. Sure. Susan, do you want to cover this one? I'll cover it.
No.
Member ethics. We had a policy, and we
You
made
hit me
some
up in the
adjustments.
middle of the night.
This
meeting.
It was quite early. Yes.
Yes, it was quite early.
The one in the packet that I'm seeing isn't marked up. Maybe.
Nope, I don't have any markings on mine.
But a couple of things that I can remember, we talked about this last time, but just to call out that we changed. Number 5 at the very end, we talked about making decisions only after all facts on a question have been presented and discussed. That's the original, right?
oh, I listened to that conversation. We were saying like the facts that you can possibly have in the moment.
To make a decision in a timely manner.
Yeah.
The one that I'm seeing in the packet actually is not I don't think the right one.
I thought that wording was changed.
It was. So apologies to the community that's looking at the packet with the wrong one in it. We can get, but that is something that we changed because we wanted to make sure that we use all the facts
Available.
that we can possibly, that are available, and make our decisions in a timely manner, like if it's an ESBC2 deadline, we can't control that. So things like that. So we tweaked that language just a bit. Yeah. And then we, again, the one in the packet is the original, so the changes are not here, but
What were the changes?
I'm trying to remember.
Oh, okay.
There was another change to number 1. Recognize that actions at official meetings are binding and that they alone cannot. Actions at official meetings, this is not even written correctly, is binding and that they alone cannot bind the committee. The number 1, when written correctly, was about an individual member not being able to act alone. That you can't make a decision for the committee as an individual. And we just clarified the language there. So we will get the correct version back out to the community and review it next time.
Okay, I apologize for that. The one that I have from last time does have the corrections in it.
Oh, do you want to go through them?
I don't mind reading them, sure.
Looks like you guys did a lot of work on that. Just looking at,
Yes.
peeking at her paper.
We did. We did.
So on the first page, it says that the Code of Ethics delineates 3 areas. And so I think that when you got to a school committee and their relations with their fellow committee members should, number 1 in that section was changed to say recognize that actions at official meetings are binding and that individual committee members alone cannot bind the committee outside of such meetings. I don't believe 2 or 3 was altered, but number 4 says, school committee members will not withhold pertinent information on school or personnel matters from members of their own committee that would directly impact the ability of the committee to execute and uphold its responsibilities in service to students of the district. Members of other committees seeking help or information on school committee problems will be directed to the school committee chair. And then for number 5, I think you struck the entire sentence and replaced it with, school committee members will cast votes based on all available facts and information presented and discussed in order to render the best possible decision in a timely manner.
Thank you. I like that number 5 better.
Yes.
Okay, again, I think we're not going to vote on this. This is just a second reading. Any feedback for the policy working group on those changes?
Oh, those are good changes.
Okay, and that was a lot of pages down in the packet, so it's just going to take me a minute to scroll back up. Okay, so that will come back and brings us then into future agenda items. We did hit a couple tonight, but important to keep our list going if people have other things they want to bring forward for future agendas.
I just, when will we vote Dr. Kavanaugh's goals and indicators? Will that be on the 24th?
I would say that should be the beginning of
22nd?
September. Or well, the 22nd is the ESBC piece. I don't know
Yeah.
if we want to add other things onto that. I think we might be better off having that in a regular meeting.
Okay.
Here would be my thought. I don't know.
So the next.
So it would be the first September meeting.
Okay.
Unless others feel otherwise, I could go.
I just wouldn't want to go any longer because.
No.
Yes, the 7th. This is the first
September, is that okay with you? One thing that I do want to try to be better about this year is making sure that we get to that formative evaluation in a more timely manner. It felt like the time between the formative and the summative was short because it kept getting pushed out. So I felt badly on that. Okay, then that brings us down to items by consensus.
Oh my goodness. As superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Holly, is there a second? Second by Susan. We'll do a roll call vote, starting with Adam.
Adam, aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Holly?
Yeah.
Amanda?
Aye.
And I am also an aye. So that passes unanimously, and that then brings us into adjournment. Is there a person who would like to make that motion?
I'd like to move that we adjourn this meeting.
Motion by Susan, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Holly. We'll do a roll call starting with you, Adam.
Adam, aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Holly?
Yes.
Amanda?
Aye.
I am also an aye, and we are adjourned at 9:16. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will have our next meeting on August 24th, which is the working session, and then on September 7th for a regular meeting. So
We'll
thank
send
you.
out a message. It's 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. You'll let us know.
Yes, I will get that. If we can figure that out in the next week, that would be great.
And August 22nd for our vote.
And August 22nd for a vote. I see. I didn't even say that because it wasn't on the agenda. So that's great.
August 22nd for.
We're going to meet after the ESBC
yes.
to have that vote.
Yes.
So all right, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of summer, and good night.